Hello.
Hi.
Hola.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, sure. So basically, when I got introduced to jailbreaking, it was through a friend, and this was when I was around 11 or 12 years old. So at first, I thought it was really cool, and I basically solely used it as a user. So, I mean, I never learned how to make tweaks in the beginning. But then after that, I began to develop iOS apps. And when I did that, I still thought of jailbreaking as this sort of magical concept, and I never understood how you could really modify an app. But that's when I saw this one. I think it was a Black Hat talk. It was about making tweaks for jail devices, and so this was by I think Bishop Fox, and that really intrigued me. So basically, that's when I actually started looking into um, jailbreak slash jailed tweak development. And since then, it's just, I mean, I've just learned a ton after that. And I tried making my own tools to develop tweaks. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay. I had push to talk on. That wasn't what happened the first time. Okay. So basically, when I was like 12 or so, like I got an iPod Touch. It was like on iOS 5. And like I saw all these cool things, but they all needed like a jailbreak. And the only way to get it without like a computer were all these like sketchy websites, and like obviously they weren't going to give you a jailbreak. And my mom had like banned me from doing any of that. So one day I just like snuck away like a computer from my parents' room and like jailbroke my iPod. And like I had like all this like a Siri tweak for it to get Siri on it. Like an unfolding lock screen tweak. It was like they had like really cool animations with like the skeuomorphic UI. And then just like 5 years later, when I actually knew how to code, I just kind of started making tweaks, and that was pretty much it. And then like my first tweak was like clean notifications 10, and I made it by accident. But I released it and I got like so many downloads, and then I just kind of like kept making tweaks. So it was good.
Okay. So my first iPhone was a 3GS way back in the day. And I basically had it jailbroken right out of the gate by this guy who sold iPhone cases out of his garage. Well, it was fine. And he showed me, how to get free apps off the App Store, which I now know is piracy, but it didn't matter back then. So I just used it as a user with themes and tweaks and whatnot for a number of years. This was actually after spending some time doing some game hacking. where it was really convenient to just use Substrate to patch whatever functions you needed. And then I moved into tweak development.
Well, I actually knew about jailbreaking before I even got an iOS device. It was like this before I was even evaluating getting my iPod Touch 3rd Gen. I was like, okay, can I run Unix utilities and a Unix shell on it? Because like I wanted a full computer in my pocket. Because like back then I was more of a Windows and Linux guy than an iOS person. So, like, I saw these people on YouTube and they're running mTerminal and they're running various utilities that they were downloading off of Cydia, which looked a lot like Synaptic, which is the package manager, because they're both APT. So that's when I was like, okay, cool, I'll get one. But I didn't jailbreak it just yet, because, like, there was all these things like, oh, there's warranty might be void, etc. So, like, but then one day I decided, like, but then I saw that, like, okay, wait, if this is a computer, if you restore it, it wipes the file system. So how is Apple going to know? So then I was just like, okay, I'll just bite the bullet and run Spirit to jailbreak 312.
I didn't actually answer the first question yet. It's all good. So for me, I actually got into hacking devices before the iPhone came out with the first Apple TV. It was just pissing me off to no end that I always had to have iTunes open to play stuff, that it would only play stuff with H.264 and MPEG-4 format. And it just seems way too limited in general. I saw people starting to hack it. I think Erica Sedun and a few other people started hacking around with it. So I was like, you know what? Where are all these people congregating? I want to figure out what's going on and start playing with this stuff. I was doing some software development before that for like 2 or 3 years. Wasn't super serious about it yet. Kind of just a hobby. And then we joined in the awkward TV chat room on MoveSpeak, which doesn't even exist anymore on IRC. And when the Apple TV 2 came out, is actually when all the people from Chronic Dev that I eventually ended up joining started filing into that room. And they're like, "Hey, these are the people that know how to hack Apple TVs. It's running iOS now. It has an ARM processor. Like, let's see if we can like share notes and figure this stuff out." So everything's kind of history from there.
Sure. Is it okay if I name three? They're really short, just like gotta have three. So like a lot of my like newer tweaks are like UI heavy, like they add like a new like just type of user interface in general, like ultrasound, short look, those types of things. Those are like the ones I think I like put the most work into, whatever. So like my inspiration a lot there was like Apple, their design ethos, their aesthetic, everything. And that's probably not a popular answer here, but like I like my things to like integrate into the system well. Otherwise, Jamie because he was like my close friend and he was like the one making tweaks at the time, so I just kind of like copied him, and like that was one of the things that got me into it. And then like Curb for like his work on Theos and stuff, and like just everything around that's been like very inspirational and really helpful getting me going.
So okay, so if I can go next, right. So it's a bit cliched, but I think my biggest inspiration in all of this is probably Steve Jobs. So I mean, I remember reading his biography by Walter Isaacson, and this was when I was quite young, and I really loved it. So I mean, seeing the way that he would lead Apple, stuff like that, that it really inspired me. And beyond that, I mean, I think a lot of his quotes have also resonated with me. I mean, especially the crazy ones stuff. I mean, here's to the crazy ones. So, another thing is that when I make tweaks, I mainly do it, or not necessarily tweaks. When I make anything, I mainly do it to help people, and so I love doing stuff that helps make people's lives better in some way or the other. And for example, a lot of my tools are dev tools, and I try to make people's development experience way better. So that's one of the motivations for me when I'm developing tools.
I can jump in. I had kind of a wide range of people that inspired me when I first got into this. I don't know if he still leads the Apple Watch team, but the one and only WWDC I went to in 2013, he went by a pseudonym when he programmed for Apple TV stuff. He made the back row developer kit before we even had an SDK. He went by Alan Quartermain, but when he actually publicly started working on the stuff and didn't have his old company holding him back anymore, he showed that his name was Jim Dovey. He was an amazing inspiration for Apple TV and awkward TV stuff. Anytime I had a question, no matter how dumb, because I had a lot of dumb questions, he just like soldiered through it every time and never gave me shit. Dustin, when I first got into this, Dustin was huge. It was nice having the guy that wrote Theos to be like, "Hey, I have a dumb question about Theos." He's like, "Of course you do." It was a pretty commonplace occurrence, and just the whole like the chronic dev team like took me in and just like I don't know, like I just felt like right at home. I felt like I was just like with my fucking brothers. Sorry, excuse my language, but yeah. And when I write a tweak, I like to make it look like it actually belongs in the place too. So like Apple's a huge inspiration as well. I throw and Aaron Ash, he does a great job of making things look like they belong. Ryan Petrich, like there's too many to list, so I'm not going to list everybody.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I can go. So like a few years ago, as you might know, I'm not really a fan of how Apple has done their latest flat UI iteration. Well, latest as in iOS 7 and higher. So, for a while back in the early iOS 7 days, I used to get a lot of inspiration from forestalls. As you might know, I've ported a lot of iOS 6 UI elements to iOS 7 back in the day. And I actually still maintain classic folders because that's been a lot better than the default folders in newer versions. However, recently, I've actually been taking more inspiration from Microsoft than Apple because I actually like their flat UI design in newer versions of Windows. And I think Apple could learn a thing or two from it.
All right. This is a tough question to answer because I have a lot of sources of inspiration from a lot of people. But I think the thing that I'll mention with regards to jailbreaking specifically is Sarek and the way that he's basically maintained an ecosystem for so many years. And the way he thinks does guide a lot of the ways I handle stuff related to jailbreaking, I suppose.
Alright, so I won't spill the beans on any core trust bypass because that's currently kind of under NDA internally for us. But I can talk about the iOS 11 stuff since that's been open source for a while. So, in a nutshell, you'd first get code execution in a user land process. The easiest way, of course, is just to sideload because that's how you run an app. And you run an exploit such as voucher swap or ventex to gain a task for PID 0. You don't exactly need task for PID 0, but it's the most convenient way to get a kernel read-write primitive, which allows you to read and write bytes from the kernel. And from there, on iOS 11, we then elevate ourselves to root, since we can write in the kernel. We can easily just elevate our own process. And then from there, we attach to ampfd to load our interposing dilib, which essentially kills code signing effectively. And for the last bit, we then inject into launchd to load our, and that intercepts process launches, which then allows us to do tweak injection. Now, of course, just injecting to launchd doesn't affect running processes, so that's where we run ld restart, which restarts every system process, which allows tweaks to inject in.
Um, can I just speak for a second? So, if you don't mind, right. So, I think Coolstar explained the way that a jailbreak works pretty well. But in case there's still time for me to explain how tweaking itself works, right? So, basically, yeah, as I said, Coolstar pretty much nailed it when he was explaining how the jailbreak itself works. But this is one thing that I've wondered for a long time, which is how exactly do you tweak something? That is, for a layman, how exactly would they understand what a tweak even is? And so, I mean, I think to explain this, you have to understand the way that code works. And basically, it's you sort of have these procedures, which are a set of instructions. And you have various different sets of instructions that do different things. So essentially, on a very high level, the way that tweaking works is that what you're doing is you're sort of firstly, what you need to do is you've got to inject, you've got to attain execution inside of the app that you're running, which means that you need to be able to run your own code inside of the app. So once you've got that happening, basically what you do is that you're essentially um, you're taking that set of instructions that an app is using. Like say for example, I have a set of instructions that sets the background color of my app. So I would take that set of instructions and I'd replace it with my own instructions. And what I'm going to do is that I'm basically going to change the instructions to make it set it to whatever color I want, for example. And that's a very high level explanation of how tweaking works.
So this was back when I was bootstrapping iOS 11 before we launched the full 1.0 release of Electra for iOS 11.1.2. So from the get-go, we shipped with 64-bit APT 1.4. And I was trying to get Cydia running. So I was trying to compile it from source. But I was trying to use upstream APT because like there's various problems if you mix versions of APT. And it would just sometimes I'd manage to get it to compile, but then it turns out it was using private APIs in APT because they were public 10 years ago, but the upstream APT developers decided that you really should not use these. And a lot of APIs have actually been added in forms of custom patches made by Sark 2 AP, which just creates a huge maintenance overhead on trying to update APT. So I was not able to get Cydia compiled with the version of APT I want. And at that point it would be considered unofficial Cydia by a lot of people if I compile. So I was like, okay, let's see if we can. I was like, okay, this thing is super annoying to try to get work. So in the end, I ended up binary patching Cydia, which mostly got it working. And the reason I say mostly is because it's been extremely bugged. I think it's broken like 5 times when we've pushed updates to the Electro repo. Like, it's just been completely unstable. And that's like, I've actually been wanting to make a package manager for a while, but the bugginess of Cydia has just been like, okay, we need a new package manager. And I did try Limitless, which is a fork of Cydia that was supposed to be easier to build and everything, which it was easier to build, but it still suffers from the same private API usage in APT and the same maintenance overhead. So yeah, Cydia was pretty much a no-go.
And I'm gonna chime in here for a second if you don't mind. For me, I really didn't have a choice because Cydia was never a thing on Apple TV. I've always kind of been responsible. Like when Yuta TV was on the first Apple TV, it was kind of I tried to kind of emulate Xbox Media Center. It's called Kodi now. Play emulators, install software, play video, like the whole kit and caboodle. And then when the second Apple TV came out, a lot all that stuff was much hard. It's like a much higher barrier for entry to get it done because I was using Intel on the first Apple TV and it's ARM now, and a lot of the stuff just wasn't built for ARM yet, or just wouldn't work on the Apple TV specifically. So Nito TV from that point it was pretty much just a package manager. So and then from there, I've kind of tried to make it do everything that Cydia or Cilio or any other package manager would do. Yeah, the initially for the second and third generation Apple TV, everything was part of the Finder or Apple TV app. You could think that to be analogous to Springboard or just the app that runs all the other apps. And you just loaded it as a plugin. You didn't really even have more than one app running on that generation of Apple TV. Actually, the first through the third, that was the case. And the fourth is when they kind of made it similar to iOS, but it's not Springboard. Instead, it's Pineboard, Headboard, Backboard. Not Backboard D is the same between the both, but the Headboard and Pineboard is kind of like Springboard, but split into two apps. But everybody, when they actually do write their own apps, they're standalone apps. Like from that perspective, it's the same.
Core Trust has nothing to do with this, actually.
So
No,
what was
it does not.
patched in 12.1.3 was actually the pack bypass.
Actually, it was the pack forgery, because there's no you forge pack bits and pointers. So
Technically, it was the forgery, but well, actually, maybe the bypass is still there once you get the initial forgery, but I haven't looked into it.
I mean, but the forgery is required to do the code signing bypass or even inject into Trust Cache, because A12 has what Apple calls page protection layer, which is essentially a form of kernel data read-only. It's not really read-only, except it can only be written to by certain regions of the, and to do, which essentially means that to do anything to write into those regions, you need to call functions in the kernel to do it for you. And to do that, you need a way to forge pack bits. And that has been killed on 12.3 and higher. Only time will tell. It's not looking good though, but we'll see.
I think we'll be fine. I think QWERTY has demoed a pack forgery / bypass on iOS 13.
Of course he does.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, as well.
He has
If
one
that
within
ever
hours.
comes out, we'll be able to use it.
Only time will tell if we see one that's public though.
Or Ian Beer, for that matter.
Or Brandon is on.
True. Fucking legends. I'll jump in on this one real quick. For the Apple TV, 12 was a goddamn disaster until Psycho 2, my man over here, jumped in and did Mac Swap. It was the first one that I could get to work at all on 12 on any device. Voucher swap, everything else, like just could never get the timing right. It would panic every single time, and I was probably about a month behind everybody else because it took me so long to get in the door. Well, they weren't waiting for me to finish, but I was late to the party because they were way ahead of me getting their stuff working. Like by the time they had like tweaks working and everything else, like I was still just like just laying the groundwork because it took me so long just to get the first exploit even. So to speak, I mean, 10 seconds, so to speak. Yeah.
So Chimera, because we rely on a core trust bypass, that requires full system-wide injection. And the thing with Electra was that it does not do full system-wide injection. It actually just injects into like apps and daemons that were spawned by LaunchD and nothing past that. So in Electra, we could pretty much get away with having jailbreak D be about like 90% stable because that was good enough for most of the user base. And like if you look through the jailbreak D1 code, you'll see it's an absolute mess of dispatch queues, and because the entire thing was it was jailbreak D1 was an attempt to fix up a proof of concept for production use when that's not really how you should ship production software. But for all intents and purposes, it was good enough for most people on iOS 11. However, on Chimera, because we have full system-wide injection, that puts a lot more, what do you call it? Like, it expects a lot more from Jailbreak D in terms of stability. So, like, the first thing we did, obviously, as many people know in Electra 1.3, was we made a rewrite called Jailbreak D2, which actually rewrote from the ground up how Jailbreak D should have been from the start, as designed for production use. And then on iOS 12, we added the system-wide injection, and then we had to build out a set of unit tests internally to make sure the thing worked reliably. Since now instead of like about 15% of processes using it, now it's like 100%. So everything is using it. So it has to be fully reliable. Past that, we of course got the core trust bypass working, and then it was just 8.12 after, which was a challenge of its own. Mostly actually because not all of us had 8.12 devices, so we'd be like making code and then waiting on Triangle to test it. Or sometimes if there were components I could test on a jailed device, I'd borrow Smushy Taco's device remotely over TeamViewer and test it on his, because yeah, it's yeah. Yeah.
You can't kill jailbreaking.
The community, if anything kills it, it'll be the community. Me, sure. There's just a lot of people fighting over really dumb shit, and there's a lot of unnecessary drama, and some people just pop on to stir the pot. And I don't want to get super controversial here, so I'll kind of just leave it at that. Like, people just need to chill the fuck out. You know, like we do this shit for free. Yeah, some of us get money for it, some of us get donations for it, some of us sell tweaks, whatever. Like, it is what it is. It's hard work. We enjoy doing it, but just make it so we still enjoy doing it. That's all I ask. Is that cool? Like, I don't think it really answers the question, but I don't know what else to say.
Um, Right. So when we're talking about jailbreaking, if I might add to that, basically, in my opinion, the way I view jailbreaking is more of a spirit than the technology behind it itself. So even if Apple does somehow manage to patch every single bug that could lead to jailbreak, which is extremely unlikely, let me just reiterate that. Um, there is, of course, the community. It's still alive. And the thing is that we do have tweaks that work on jail devices. And for example, with this recent court case that just happened about Apple opening up their system to other third party app stores, there's an extremely high possibility that it would make side loading way easier. And I think as far as side loading is concerned, as long as that's alive, at least the spirit of the jailbreak community remains alive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yes, mostly. I think that there's always going to be something that people would want to do that Apple isn't going to allow, even if they opened the system up to whatever third party app stores are out there.
Uh, I think Apple could get like right now. Like if you think about the jailbreak community, there's the developers who are about like I'd say 10 to 15% of the community at most, and then there's the users who are about 85 to 90. So the thing with most users is they don't particularly care about certain aspects of jailbreak. Like they just want their themes, some of their tweaks, etc. So I think for those guys, Apple could possibly disincentivize them from jailbreak if they open their system up a bit more. Like if they allowed custom lock screens, which they could very easily do because they have remote view functionality. Because like we already have custom keyboards. I remember back before that came out, everyone was like, "Oh, I'm never going to add custom keyboards." Yet here we are with custom keyboard. I think they can extend that further. Like if they allow custom lock screens, maybe in certain ways they could like enable some built-in functionality that currently tweaks are enabled. I think they can, and especially theming engine. They already have one built in, and Anemone 3 actually is built upon that. I think they could get about 60% of the community to stop caring effectively if they add these basic features, which, of course, there will still be the other people who will remain and care about jailbreaking because there's always going to be something we want to do that Apple doesn't want. However, I'd say like they are they're not killing exploits themselves. They're all killing the post exploitation strategies for patching iOS to enable these functionalities. And previously, they've been doing it in software with KPP, but as we all know, they've been doing it in hardware in the newer versions of. And I think it'll only be so long that the iPhone 10 will be. Like, it'll be 5 years or so, but like maybe we'll have new ways around for the A12 and newer devices. But if not, right now it kind of looks like we're tied to the A11 for the public scene, at least higher than 12.3.
Um, and
I mean,
as far as stock iOS is concerned, I think Apple is really on the right track with their extension ecosystem and the way that they're developing extensions. I think it makes it, especially with stuff like, I mean, they added shortcuts, intent extensions, and stuff. So that
Don't
it sort of
forget ad block.
circumvents the need
That was a
for.
big one too.
Yeah,
like
that too. And
just in regards to like A12 though, do you not think it's feasible to brute force the pack like authentication code?
hi,
Took him
Jamie.
long enough.
Slacking.
I mean, are you going to brute force every single pointer that you use in the kernel? I'm sure you would not want a process to take 10
Yeah, but
minutes to spawn.
would you not only want to brute force it once, like at jailbreak time, like, and then you could just run it in the background, and then you have the key then, so it's fine.
But I think for your code execution primitive, you'd still need to brute force every time you want to call a kernel function.
And you'd also need the algorithm that Apple uses, which no one has done silicon tracing yet, so we don't
I mean,
know what they
it
use.
could
You
be
do have
reversed, like,
gadgets
that's not
you
a problem.
can use. You only need one forged pointer.
Honestly, I don't think it will ever die, because the thing is, there's always going to be flaws and issues within software, and Apple can't fix all the bugs in their software. Like, there's always going to be one days, which is all you need to make a jailbreak, really. And even if there's not that many people interested in it anymore, I think there's still people that are gonna want to do it. And I think, okay, so, I mean, finding a pack bypass is pretty hard, as like people have like mentioned, but it's not infallible at the moment, and there's definitely like flaws in it and how it's implemented. Like, if you look at how how the pack bypass works for the current version, like I'm sure there's going to be other like issues of that like kind that Apple
I
haven't
mean,
fixed yet.
the current way is not future proof in any means, though, because it's a software flaw in the pack implementation.
Right, but they're always going to exist. Well, his answer's wrong. His answer is wrong.
Your face is wrong. I honestly don't think that they can. It's the issues I have with it are baked into. And what I mean by that is I'm not a fan of stuff that's strictly typed. I like the dynamic nature of Objective C. I like that it doesn't coddle me and tell me, no, everything has to be explicit. Yeah, I know you can like work around that, but then there's pretty much no point to have. There's things that I like, just to be diplomatic. I like that enums and structs are first class citizens. That's very cool. Like the extra stuff you can do with those. Being able to return a tuple. There's a bunch of different stuff about it that's really cool. But then the lack of interop with C, it has it. It's just not good. Its build speeds are still slower, and to me that's still important. I'm a very iterative, probably not pronouncing that right, developer. I build a lot, I test a lot, and when I'm losing cycles every single time I build for negligible to no benefits, in my opinion, it just doesn't make sense to use it.
I think his problem with it is just he's old, you know, and he just doesn't like new things.
Shots fired.
I
Get the
mean,
fuck off my lawn.
So when I was
It's
speaking to him
true.
individually, he did say that he's a bit resistant to change, and I do sort of agree with that. And I think that static typing can be really nice once you get to know it, once you get used to it, and you're sort of letting the compiler find bugs for you. And also, Swift is faster than Objective C, considering the fact that Swift does a lot more stuff at compile time than at runtime, which sort of answers Nito's question as well as to why it's so much slower when you're compiling, which is the fact that it's basically making up for all of that lost time on the user's end by making it way faster for the user.
I
Which is
think another
also, I mean, so we started porting stuff in Cilio, for example, to Swift as well, and we've already seen a massive speed up. I think Coolstar can talk about that later, perhaps.
yeah, I think another thing about that as well is it kind of it explains why Swift has to be type safe. Like a lot of the optimizations the compiler can make are only possible because it knows for certain what a type of an object is. For example.
Uh, so as far as goals for Cilio, I think we've mostly gotten there. But there are a few things that I think we probably want to have. There's a few I won't mention because, like, if I mention it, it'll cause controversy. So I'll keep it private. But of course, UI experience is at the and if possible, we want to make this even faster so it can handle larger repositories. And right now, like internally, we've mostly gotten full big boss, though so far only actually on the Cilio demo for jail devices. Yeah, since right now APT is actually the bottleneck. When you tap the get button, like some users might notice if you have large repositories, it takes a little bit to pop up the queue mechanism. And that's because in the background it's spawning a instance of APT to resolve dependencies, and that is effectively the only proper way to do it.
I was just going to say that, to be honest. I think speed and open sourcing it as well. I think that's a goal we want to have.
Let's convert it to Swift first.
iOS 13, probably. Probably.
I mean, there are dark mode tweaks that you can use right now if you want to get Cilio in dark mode.
I mean, if you really want Cilio in dark mode without a tweak right now, you can just turn on Smart Invert, and it actually works because Cilio has full support for it.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about this. So one of the apps I've been working on lately is called Supercharge. More on that later. Um, not today though. But basically, what Supercharge allows you to do is it's sort of like Flex 3, if anyone knows about that, by John. Um, and what we do plan on doing is I would like to integrate Supercharge into Chimera or Electra. And I think that will basically allow you to make tweaks in a really easy manner. It's basically I've released a private beta, and so far the response has been really good. And people have made tweaks that I couldn't even imagine possible. And you don't need any development experience whatsoever. You just need to know what a method is. And as long as you know that, which is basically, it ties into the explanation that I gave earlier about how you make tweaks. As long as you know that high level explanation, you should be able to make tweaks using Supercharge. Mhm.
Oh boy.
Oh, there's quite a bit.
Honestly, the first one's the operating system. It was really bad, like iOS 11 was.
Uh,
Yeah.
Probably not, like because we need system-wide injection. But without system-wide injection, we might be okay-ish. Like it would not be as good as Jailbreak D2, but it would probably still be quite a bit better than 11. But there were a few other reasons that were part of Jailbreak D's. It's so if you look on the public code for Electra 11.3.1, since it's open source, you'll notice in Jailbreak D1 there's a lot of code, mostly in kern utils and main, and that's mostly because Jailbreak D1 was like, it was initially a proof of concept that I made that could demonstrate that tweak injection worked. Like the initial version was not meant at all to be used in production. Like that's why it was in these like small betas. Remember Electra beta before 1.0 when you had to load your tweaks manually? That was because Jailbreak D1 was not completely stable. In fact, it took us a while to even get LD restart working on Jailbreak D1 because
Still doesn't work on Apple TV on the first one. Sorry, I didn't.
but it does work on 2, right?
Yeah.
So like basically the first Jailbreak D used to use UDP to communicate between Launch D and Jailbreak D. And UDP, as you might know, you can crack a UDP joke and no one will understand it half the time. Because UDP drops packets whenever it feels like, which means that your process does not launch. So, like, we quickly fixed that, but then there were other problems since it was originally designed to use UDP, which does not block the thread. But Jailbreak D1 does not handle queuing and thread management properly, so it can sometimes hit deadlocks if you really push it very hard. Jailbreak D2 is designed to fix all of it.
I've been meaning to teach a class on tweak development after my store launch, but that still hasn't happened yet. So, I mean, the website's up, but there's still some SSL issues. We have, not SSL payment processing issues we have to deal with. But that is still something I plan on doing. It's going to be very tvOS centric, but it's still just going to be like widely covering tweak development in general. So it doesn't have to be stuff you learn from it. Doesn't have to be applied just the Apple TV, and it won't be all on the Apple TV. It'll just be more focused towards it. So that's something I still plan on doing. Yeah, so I definitely have plans for that, and anybody else has, that's me.
Um, so the main tool they use to make JBig tweaks is Theos, and one thing that the Theos team has noticed, if I can speak on their behalf, is the fact that a lot of tutorials on the internet are extremely outdated, and we do constantly stress on the fact that our wiki is the only one that's updated at the moment. That is the GitHub wiki. So I would probably consider making official tutorials for Theos, which would ensure that people get to know how to make tweaks the right way rather than just how to make tweaks. Because I mean, you can make tweaks using Theos in the wrong way. There are multiple ways to. I mean, you could use a version of Theos from 2013, for example, which is
Like
what
that,
a lot of tutorials still recommend that somehow. And we still continuously get issues on our GitHub repository about that 2013 version of Theos. Um, so that sort of tweak doesn't actually I mean, it doesn't survive in the long term because it's just going to end up breaking sooner or later, is the thing. Which is why I would definitely consider making tutorials. I just haven't found time yet.
Speaking of which, I haven't updated DL.pdf on my website in like forever. It still tells Windows users download the iOS 8.1 SDK.
I mean, another thing is that even the Linux toolchain for Theos was extremely outdated until quite recently, in fact, and I just updated it so that you can actually use an iOS SDK beyond 9.2. Because before that, everyone was stuck on using an SDK that was like 4 years old. Yeah.
MIT. I like a more permissive license. I don't like a license that constrains what people can do with it. I mean, I know that that opens it up to being able to, take a project that is free and open source and does a lot of cool shit and just rebrand it and sell it. And it's one of the drawbacks of it. That doesn't really fight against it. But I've had my issues with GPL, so I will personally never use that one ever again in any form.
It's probably got to be BSD for me. It's what I've used for a long time, and it won't cause you problems down the line like GPL does.
I mean, depending on the project, I would pick different licenses. So, for example, if I really want my project to only be used in open source projects, of course, GPL is the way to go then. And however, I mean, if I'm fine with it being used in closed source stuff, I'd probably pick MIT. And that's mainly because MIT is just one of the most widely used licenses out there, and it's compatible with a lot of other licenses, as far as I know. And yeah, so basically, MIT is my go-to license.
I think the resident sleeper in here is the Apache license, which is also actually really good open source.
Yeah, Apache is good too.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
one thing I do like about Apache is that you have to list the modifications that you make.
Yeah.
So that's, in fact, the Swift repository is licensed under Apache.
Sigda's actually in the channel. Oh, yeah, okay, cool. So I asked him about this, and he's actually referring to like how locked down iOS is, so you can't even like execute things or nor remount stuff like the file system. And honestly, I think that for the future, I think we're gonna have to like stop writing stuff to the root file system. So perhaps that doesn't have like a future on iOS, but but then again, it could be modified so it works without a remount. So who knows?
I mean, you could argue that. Sorry, were you saying something?
I quite like the idea of writing like a package manager from the ground up, but I mean, it's a hard task to do. So, but I quite like that
think
idea.
It would be.
I mean, there
It
are
would have to be
various
a
package
system that's
managers.
designed for the restrictions of iOS.
Well, so I do want to say something about that, which is the fact that with macOS Catalina, they've actually blocked off access to the rootfs on macOS as well without without the required permissions, which means that even on macOS they're starting to push towards keeping your stuff away from the rootfs. So I mean, if APT does come to macOS, it'll probably need to bypass the rootfs lockdown as well. And
Yeah, but that's because you can disable the rootfs lockdown now. But in the future, would you be able to do that? Who knows? No, you can. I think if you make a file, it's a dot file in the root
yeah, in
directory,
fact,
isn't it?
at the moment, I think you have to enable it explicitly, but in a later
Oh,
beta,
okay.
they're actually gonna
Then-
make it the default.
Yeah, and then it's opt out, but it is going to be opt out still.
Well, I
Even if you
mean, the
have
thing
the
is,
rootfs
the
mounted
thing
for
is
GNOME,
that
most of the places you'd actually want to write to are still read-write.
And I mean, the thing is that the way Apple works and the way they're working now with regards to Mac OS is that they're slowly locking down stuff. And while they're doing that, they're basically removing access to features that they locked down previously. For example, with Gatekeeper, they keep on getting stricter and stricter. And I mean, I'm not sure whether they've already done this or whether they are going to do this, but well, I mean, unsigned code execution is probably going through Mac OS very soon.
Possibly, and I mean, if you look at the new Macs with the T2 and newer chips, they actually have SHSH blobs and stuff. Like they have TSS implemented in. So I mean, Macs are definitely getting more locked down. It's a matter of when, not if.
Well, to a funny side note, to run the Mac version of N Control, you have to jailbreak your Mac. I'm not kidding.
What you
It's
mean
kinda
disable
ridiculous.
SIP?
What's
I'm
up?
curious, what games can you use N control on macOS for? 'Cause
It's a great question. I had to actually write a sample app to even test it because I didn't know that answer. So that's why I don't really push that version too much. It's kind of just a free add-on, but I found it funny that we're talking about how locked down it is, and it's just to get, I think, 2 entitlements to even make it work in the first. For what? No. You can pair it, but it doesn't do anything. I mean, maybe.
macOS does natively support standard HID compliant controllers. So like
Yeah, but I mean, the game needs to specifically have support for that controller. It's not like
but
just
that
automatically.
is like most games on macOS though, to be honest.
They might. I honestly don't do a lot of Mac OS gaming, so I could be completely wrong.
Because I remember I used to play a bunch of Steam games on macOS when I was too lazy to reboot, and it worked fine with the standard Logitech controller.
Yeah, the Logitech. Well, I mean, those ones were designed specifically to work with computers and stuff like that, whereas the PS4 DualShock ones. I mean, they work, but they're not like you bought that Logitech to work with your Mac or your PC.
I mean, so bringing the discussion back to macOS and jailbreaking in particular,
Sorry about that.
um, I feel like jailbreaking is probably going to become a proper thing on macOS very soon. I mean, for example, they've literally ported over, as far as I know, they ported over Apple Mobile File Integrity Daemon over to macOS,
That's been there
which
for a long
means
time.
yeah, so they did that. So they did that a while ago, which means that I mean, if they do decide to lock it down further and disable the AMFID get out of my way UG, um, it's probably going to require an actual jailbreak to be able to do anything on macOS. For example, they might even lock down system integrity protection so that you can't disable it.
You could always just build a Hackintosh though. Why buy Mac hardware when it's locked down?
I mean, leave it to Cool Star to talk about Hackintoshes.
Am I the
Hey,
only one who doesn't think they're gonna do that?
I mean, they're competing with Hackintoshes right now, so they really can't.
I think the way Apple approaches macOS is a lot different from what they're doing with iOS devices. I have
I
good
think that's
reasons to
changing
believe
now,
that
though.
they're not going to ever completely block out unsigned code execution on Mac.
Well, I'd say they actually cannot do it until they like completely get everything off of Intel chips. Because as long as they stay on the x86 architecture, people will always run Hackintosh. And if Macs are suddenly locked down, everyone will start migrating to Hackintoshes. So there goes their hardware sales.
Well, I mean, they are moving over to ARM now, so at least
I
it's
mean,
rumored they're
not
gonna do that
not yet. They
recently.
still haven't shipped an ARM Mac, and it'll be several years after they ship the first before they completely switch over to.
I don't know what the future holds.
So I'll say, since I have done actually some testing on, we actually do have some stuff that works on for post exploitation on iOS 13. So pretty much we just need a exploit to get kernel read write, and we're good for A11 and lower.
Well, yeah, and I guess if you're using Corellium, you can test out the post exploitation stuff extremely easily, you know.
Yeah, I just
So
patch out the checks when calling task for PID0 in the kernel, because we can just load in any kernel we want.
So yeah, this is a very common question, and as of right now, I mean, outside of end control, which you can't even officially properly buy yet, there isn't any huge game changing things that is possible that you can use like right this second. I mean, you can install and sideload all of those apps like Provenance and everything else that I supply on the store. It's kind of just the about the philosophy in general of being able to do whatever you want with your device. Like there's dialogues that piss me off that are like, hey, you want to sign in while I'm in the middle of watching a movie? I wrote a tweak to be able to disable that. Like the ability to do these things, I think, is one of the most important things. And I think that there's really cool ideas like Ryan Petrich listed off like a huge list of ideas that they're actually picking off one by one. Like picture in picture is going to be in 13 as well. I think I remember reading, or it's maybe it may or may not be in 13. I don't know, but that was one of his. Yeah, there you go. So that was something I had planned on doing, and I may even still do, depending on how difficult it is. So it's really just about that. Like, I mean, my favorite thing to do, obviously, is install Providence with a ton of different ROMs, like PlayStation, whatever, and just play PlayStation games with my PlayStation 4, or like any other variety of controllers that I have. But outside of that, there's not something that I can point to right this second that I'm just like, oh, I'm sorry. There is one thing, Air Magic, another thing that I've written. So being able to control your Apple TV from anything that can run a web browser, and also from the command line if you type in Feather, if you have it installed. So the ability to enter text was not even a thing you could do on tvOS 9. I know that's like taking it back, but that was the original reason I made it. But yeah, I lose my remote all the time. Sometimes the remote app won't pair on my phone, and just the ability to just go in there from a web browser on my Mac, or any of the apps that I've written for it as clients on Windows or Mac or iOS for that matter. So I think that one's actually pretty damn cool. Um, but those two are probably the biggest reason at the moment. Sure. It's funny. I actually had an idea about that when I started writing. When I had finally added safe mode to tvOS, which took me so long to do. I thought about something like that because I don't remember what the username was, and I apologize because my memory sucks. But they came up with the idea of adding an extra option to the sleep menu to be able to respring or do something like that. And that made me think there's a lot of cool things we could do like that with the control center. So I have actually planned at some point on looking into how hard that would be to add our own for people that still jailbreak and aren't going to install 13 until we jailbreak it. So I'm definitely open-minded to it, and I guess I could even see how they do it and probably steal some of it. Give it right back to them.
Basically every testing we do is manual, but we have a few unit
Well,
tests.
some
Unit
things
tests
are
now.
automated. Like
Yeah.
certain components we can automatically test, but at the end of the day, the sum of the whole part still has to be manually tested right now.
And I think it's better to manually test it as well because we use it like a user would use it. So if it's fine for us, then it's probably fine for the user.
I mean, I guess in terms of testing analogies, the biggest smoke test is literally just making sure that you don't break your device. So, I mean, if you do, that
We
basically
didn't
just
break
means
any
something's
devices
gonna.
or VMs for Chimera. So
I mean, we haven't even boot looped a single virtual machine either.
exactly.
We only found out what the worst bugs were after we released it.
That's true, but they weren't that bad.
I mean, a lot of the bugs are with Cilio, to be honest, because even though we had a beta for several months, apparently no one really tested it outside of us.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing I do want to change about Cilio is I definitely want to add automated testing to it, which it doesn't really have much of at this moment. Because I mean, while you can't really test a jailbreak extremely easily, you can definitely test a package manager.
I mean, a lot of the things that were broken in Cilio, to be honest, were because when I wrote Cilio, I followed the upstream Debian and APT specification documentation to the word. And the thing is, Cydia does a lot of patches which deviate from. Now, most repos follow the upstream specification, so they've been fine with Cilio, but certain repos have not. Limneos in the past. So
Well, I think there's one of those internet laws about this or something. It's basically that any undocumented feature in your API that works will eventually become relied on. And I guess that's basically the problem that Cilio faced.
Also, I just want to explain why I was late today. It's because basically I was watching England thrash India. So, come on.
Cricket man
I don't watch
strikes
cricket,
again.
but I take offense to that statement.
Oh yeah, you lost today.
Fight.
When ETA?
Yeah, I do have a question actually. When are you gonna fix the Sidu bug?
I don't know.
Ooh.
Wait, sorry, which bug are we talking about?
There's a
The
bug
one
where
where
Cydia is
Sidu doesn't
broken.
work on Chimera.
Wait, you
after
haven't
one
fixed
play.
that yet?
All
Yeah, I
right.
haven't gotten
You
around.
motherfucker.
I just haven't booted into macOS in ages. I run Windows.
Dude, come
So
on, get on that shit, man. We had
well,
a deal about that.
yeah, so if I can talk about that, basically, I did make some patches to Cilio, which basically made it work. It made it play way better with Cydia, But the thing is that we released Chimera soon after that. So that was essentially so that it would work with Uncover. And I mean, as far as I know, that probably would have fixed any bugs that were occurring with Cydia. But right, so that wasn't merged because of the fact that we eventually released Chimera, and you didn't really need Uncover anymore.
Am I on? Hello, everybody. It's good to be back on for the second week.
Oh, I bet people are crying now.
I love you, no. But basically, up until 1.0.4, there was a I know, Kabir, what you said was that it basically removed some stuff that would have caused issues with Cydia, but I had fixed that myself. And I don't really pay attention to the project or anything with the jailbreak community much anymore. But basically, after about 1.0.5, I think was the version, it just Saidu was not allowed to access LaunchD, which is it just completely broke Cydia. And I'm sure there's a way to work around it easily, but I don't want to look into it since it was just a stupid bug on Chimera's part. But that's all I know about it.
I would like to thank you for. No, I would. Well, I'd like to thank you for not butchering my name.
I mean,
It's coming home.
that's like kind of a. I mean, that issue you mentioned is kind of the lowest priority thing on our list. We don't really support Cydia, so it's like just whenever we get around to it, maybe it'll be fixed. But yeah,
Wait, what else is on the list?
Sea creatures are cool.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, going back to the Cydia thing, I guess you just shouldn't be using Cydia.
yeah, you
So-
really should not be using it because like you'll run into other problems. Like even if
You
that's
heard it
fixed.
here first. Don't use Cydia.
If you use Cydia, your warranty is effectively void, and you will not be supported if your device catches on fire, boot loops, or goes out the window.
Fine, I'll go make my own package manager.
Thank you for having us. You've been a good host.
I've been the best host, obviously. Like, it shows at 40 minutes late.
It's not worth it.
Oh yeah, celebration party for that England win, you know. Oh, nice. I blame Justin. Thanks, Dad.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Is it over?